Yelrugu Namaskara. Very good evening, PS. So, I have with me a very interesting book that Dr. S. Jaishankar has authored, which is also very interestingly titled, Why Bharat Matters. And over the course of the next 35 to 40 minutes, we will ask him a few questions around a few themes that he has expounded in this book, which is of great importance to all of us, especially the young of India. So, but before I delve into the very first question about the book, on behalf of all Bengalurians, especially the very aspirational Bengalurians, I want to thank you for fulfilling a very long-standing demand of the people of Bengaluru and people of Karnataka of having here a US consulate. Thank you so much for making it happen. So many of our engineers were supposed to travel to Hyderabad, to Chennai, to Delhi, and this was a very long pending ask. The last time you came to Bengaluru, you had promised that you will get this done, and you have got this done. Thank you so much.
Can I respond?
Yeah, please.
First of all, let me say, for me, it's always a pleasure to come back to Bengaluru. I think many of you have heard me say this before. It's a city with which I have long personal association. So when I got this opportunity, obviously, I seized it immediately. I must also tell you, Tejasvi and I keep meeting in Parliament from time to time. And for last 4.5 years, every time I met him, he would start saying US consulate. Okay. So he's been single-mindedly after me. I think at one stage to deflect him, I sent him to the American ambassador. And that was Ken Juster, I think. And said, go and tell him you have my support. So
I did that, sir.
Yeah, I know. I'm also really very glad that we could make that decision during the Prime Minister's visit. And certainly, this is today a global city. It is one of the great centers of tech in the world. And I think it's very natural there should be a US consulate. So having now got that approved in principle, I will now go back and remind Ambassador Garcetti that he needs to set up shop here fast.
Thank you so much. Sir, I had the opportunity to read this book over the last few days. This book is of interest to any young person who is interested in world affairs. There is a lot of economics in this. There's a lot of geopolitics in this. There's a lot also, interestingly, Ramayana in this. Because most of the episodes of current geopolitics, the developments in the world theater that you describe, there's an allegorical reference that you make to episodes from the Ramayana. You quote episodes of Jatayu, of how resurgent India, you compare it with the self-confidence that Hanuman explored. So the question is, why did you... I have a twofold question rather, because your previous book was titled The India Way, and the new book is Why Bharat Matters. So why did you make the new book Bharat, while your earlier book was India? What is the significance of the change in the connotation? And second, what is the significance of the allegorical references to Ramayana and geopolitics in this book?
I think one of the reasons why I shifted from the India way to Why Bharat Matters is actually what has happened to all of us in the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, we have become much more self-confident, much more self-aware, much more impactful on the world. I mean, just think back over the last few years. I think, a large part of the world admires how we came through COVID, the solutions that we found for ourselves. We handled what was a immensely complex diplomatic challenge in the G20 presidency. In fact, a lot of people actually thought it was a poison chalice, that this is probably the most difficult time to take up a responsibility like this. We not only took it up, we not only got outcomes and brought everybody to the table, we actually even got a long-awaited reform there done, which was a moral obligation, which is to get in the African Union. Now, we've done other things which has caught the attention of the world. Landing the Chandrayaan at a particularly difficult part of the world was, some of you may have heard me say this before. We were actually at the BRICS summit for that. And that evening, through the day, obviously we were waiting for the moment. Then when it happened, the Prime Minister left the meeting and went to his room. In the evening, you had about 45, 50 presidents and prime ministers, because apart from the BRICS leaders, a lot of the African leaders and the Asian leaders were there. And I can tell you, the talk was on what we had done, but not just on what we had done. The inspiration and the hope and the sense it gave to other countries that, one of us has done something like this, and that means actually there's a possibility for all of us. So the idea of India as an exemplar, I think that's something which the younger generation particularly needs to appreciate. That what we are doing, obviously, our lives are changing, but the impact we are making on the world today. We look at digital public infrastructure. We do more cashless transactions per month in this country than I think America does in 3 years. So I'm giving you that, what has really changed. I could go back to 2014, say a decade of change. And I think the decade of change is critical to recognize, because that decade is actually the foundation for setting us up 25 years from now in the Amrit Kal. Your second question, why the Ramayana? My first book had a chapter on the Mahabharata, which a lot of people liked. I got very good audience response. And I'll tell you something about epic and culture, because some of my contemporaries suddenly think, okay, he's got into politics and there must be some political motive behind all of this. See, each one of us, these Ramayana, Mahabharata, these are part of us. Nobody needs to teach you this. You grow up with it. You know episodes, maybe not all details of it. Now, when you have something like an epic, a great epic, each one of us sees some value, something from our own lives. Somebody could see a lot of ethics in it. Somebody else, could, visualize it, maybe, from the point of view of gender. For me, as someone dealing with diplomacy, I looked or I reimagined it or reread it through the lens of world affairs, through diplomacy, through statecraft. And for me, if you look at the key concepts, what does Lord Rama do? He assembles a coalition. Assembling a coalition is the most difficult aspect of diplomacy in the world. What is Ravana's mistake? Ravana's mistake is strategic complacency. He thinks he will be invulnerable, but he has forgotten that he must seek protection against humans, because he thinks they won't, they're too puny to impact him. So what do powers do? Big powers sometimes make those mistakes. They underestimate where the challenges come from. Or look, in fact, at journey of Rama himself. You think of him as a rising power, who's acquiring skills, who's tested, who volunteers to, help with the world when in trouble, who actually goes to forests to protect rishis. This today we would say is he's actually gone into global commons to do global good. I mean, that would be the parlance with which we would use it today. And in the case of Hanuman, that Hanuman, was cursed to be forgetful. And as he actually does more and more, he discovers his strength. And that, I think, is what is happening with us today. We are discovering ourselves, and because we are discovering ourselves, that is why I use the word Bharat.
Thank you, sir. That makes, especially at a time when India is rediscovering its civilizational roots and is coming and approaching the world stage in a more reassured manner. The reference to the book, the reference to ourselves as Bharat, has a very important civilizational context as well. The other chapter in the book that I personally thought of as very important for a lay audience, as a Aam Nagrik or a Samanya Nagrik, is this chapter that you title Foreign Policy and You. Because I must also, even if this is a digression for a second, I must say, sir, before the Modi government, foreign policy was seen as something very distant, as something that is the business of a few suited, booted bureaucrats in faraway countries. But I think it was after Sushma ji and your tenure that foreign policy is something that every common Indian feels invested in, and understand that what happens in the high tables of, say, in Russia or at the G20 summit affects all of us individually, even back home. To just give you the example from the perspective of Bengaluru, the last visit of the Prime Minister to the United States was a big draw for the city of Bengaluru. We got the US consulate. We got the international battery company to start a plant in Devanhalli with an investment of $800 million. We got the General Electric company to partner with HAL to manufacture GE5 F414 jet engines in India. We also got Applied Materials to invest $400 million in a research development center in Bengaluru. So this is going to create so much of jobs, so much of economic opportunity. And whether it is COVID, whether it is extraction of Indians during Vande Bharat mission, whether it was from Ukraine, the students who came back, we see now that foreign policy affects us at every stage in our life. Could you expound more on how a common Indian, Aam Nagrik, must invest himself and see foreign policy, and what you do at those high tables at G20 or a COP26 or COP27 matters to the common Indian's life?
Okay. Let me give you 2-3 examples to sort of give a more rounded sense of your answer to your question. One, let's talk of a Samanya Nagrik. Okay, it could be a blue collar worker. Okay, a blue collar worker, let us say in the Gulf. Now, what happens when a blue collar worker has a problem where they don't have the resources, they don't know where to go, where they sometimes go not particularly helpful, Now, look at the kind of numbers today, because we have to understand today, when I said, India has changed, and particularly changed in the last decade. There are today roughly 34 million Indians and people of Indian origin who live across the world. Roughly half are our nationals and roughly half are not. Okay. A very large part of them are blue collar workers. By the way, a very large part of them are students. There are, I think, about 1.2 to 1.3 million students out at any given time. Okay. Now, is it not if we are going to speak about, rise of India, we are becoming influential, our time is coming. Is it not the basic duty of a state, of a country, of a government to look after its citizens? Okay. Now, to do that, you can only do it if you put in place a system. Okay, it cannot be that people know a Jaishankar or a Tejasvi Surya and call up and say that help me. There must be in fairness, for efficiency, for scale, there must be a system by which people in distress outside, people in need outside, can turn to the government. This is today the expectation of the average person. And by the way, it doesn't have to be necessarily a blue-collar worker or a student. It could even be any one of you tomorrow as a tourist. It could be, when COVID happened and borders closed and flights stopped, we could have actually, during COVID, after all, we brought back 7 million people. Now, I take pride in the fact that we could, because nobody in the world, in the history of the world, has done an operation so big. But I also recognize it as a basic obligation that we cannot today prepare for a global economy with mobility, with flow of talent, and this is something which is particularly important to a place like Bengaluru, that for preparing for such a world, the government's responsibility, the government's ability, the government's willingness must all change. So what I have tried to do in one of the chapters of the book is actually to look at myself and my work and the kind of things which we do in the Ministry of External Affairs from the perspective of the public. What is it they expect from us? That on the 22nd of February 2022, when the fighting started in Ukraine and 20,000 students were there, what was going through their minds about their government? When on 15th of August, when Taliban entered Kabul and there were still people out there, what did they expect from us? I mean, recently, we had, last year, we had a very, there was a civil war. There's still a civil war effectively going on in Sudan. Okay. There were about 5,000 Indians who were trapped there, including many people from Karnataka. Now, what is, how do we sort of stand by them? How do we already have systems in place for this kind of situation? This is one set of issues. I can give you a completely different set of issues. We are today looking at a technology leapfrogging. Okay, we all know that if one of the reasons why our lives have changed is because we have embraced the digital world in a manner in which very few other societies have done, and this will leapfrog us. Okay, but the digital world is not just being the consumer. The digital world, I mean, if India is to go ahead in the world and establish itself, then we must also become part of the big league. I mean, which is why today we are investing in semiconductors, because chips in a way are today the critical driver of the world. Now, getting technology and getting it in a way in which you absorb it and move it forward. I mean, you referred to the GE4 414 deal. I must tell you, I was particularly pleased about it for two reasons. It was coming to HL. And I first came to Bengaluru for the first time in my life in 1962, because at that time my grandfather was chairman HL. I'm actually named after him.
Okay, very interesting.
So this is actually my original Bengaluru connection. But the second reason is in 1986, okay, think how far back we are talking. In 1986, I was a junior officer in the embassy in Washington. We actually had a team which included Dr. Abdul Kalam, V.S. Arunachalam, Roddam Narasimha, who headed NAL here. They came to the United States because that was when the planning for what is today known as Tejas started. So it has been a very long journey for us. Now, countries evolve. I mean, Sanjeev was talking about how cities evolve, but nations also evolve. Now, I take a project like Tejas. In fact, I had the pleasure of bringing the U.S. Defense Secretary, then Caspar Weinberger, to Bengaluru for looking at the LCA project at that time. Now, I have seen how a project like that evolves. The fact today that it has reached a stage, things don't happen by themselves. It may be organic, but even organic things need a driver. It needs a push. It needs a vision. So, to me, when I saw the Prime Minister of India getting into a Tejas, you know what a powerful statement it is to our own defense people, to our own creativity, to our own technologists, that I have confidence in you, that I am actually flying up there in a plane that you have produced. So, I would say today, a large part of what we do when we speak of an aspirational world, it's important for us to respond to the daily requirements, the legitimate expectations of citizens.
So I think the sense of security that you spoke of is something that the common Indian is experiencing every day. And we saw Twitter and Instagram erupt in joy after the tunnel workers in Uttarakhand were evacuated and rescued. So the sentiment was that whether you are stuck deep in the tunnels of Uttarakhand or in the hinterland of Ukraine, the government of India will come to your rescue. And I think that sense of a renewed security in your government is something that has been a hallmark of what you call in your book the Modi era diplomacy. So can you explain for us a few characteristics of what is this Modi era diplomacy, and how is the Modi era diplomacy different from what was practiced in the pre-Modi era?
Look, I would say, the short answer is read my book, you'll get the answer. The slightly longer answer is partly, I think, a new way of thinking. Say, for example, to take our neighborhood and make them partners, not competitors, or not neighbors who envy you, but neighbors who benefit from what you're doing. I've just come today from Kathmandu. This morning, I was there at the opening of the library of Tribhuvan University. So our neighbors today associate India with education, with health. We stood by them during vaccines, during COVID. With Sri Lanka, we actually were bold enough to put out $4 billion to bail them out economically. They see the new, the power linkages. So there's a whole the change in the manner of which we deal with the neighborhood. If we go beyond that, I think the idea that with the Gulf, with Central Asia, with the Indian Ocean, how do you because we are actually recapturing our history. That because of the partition, because of the those periods of decline which Sanjeev spoke about, with Gurumurthy ji also touched upon, we had stopped thinking of these regions. These are actually our neighborhood. There were, if you go by even something like archaeology, in the middle of Vietnam, there are Shiv temples of 1,000 years old plus. In fact, as you follow the trail all the way to the east coast of China, you can see really how much our cultural and obviously our economic and possibly political activities extended. You go the other way around. Look at the Gulf. Till the 60s, even 70s, the Indian rupee was legal tender in some of these countries. So what had happened was somewhere we kind of let go of these connections. We had a narrower, smaller view of ourselves. Today, I think the big change, I come back to your first question. We are today, spreading our wings. We are making a difference to the world. And the world actually wants, a country, a power like us, today to balance out what are the established powers. And most important, at the big league, we are today holding our own. That, whether it is a complicated issue like the conflict in Ukraine and the pressures that come on you out there, or whether it is what is happening, what has been happening in the Indo-Pacific, and, how do we ensure that there is stability and there is order now. So it could be the Quad. There are pressures on us not to do the Quad. There were pressures on us to restrict our economic dealings with Russia. We have stood firm against both. So I think it's a combination of a lot of this, including, dealing with the diaspora, recognizing, and look at the global issues, climate change today, technology, even nutrition, wellness. I mean, there isn't a debate in the world in which today we're not wading into and not putting out our ideas. That is the difference.
And I think, sir, this renewed voice that India has found at a global stage is also reflecting in the way that we are dealing with our immediate neighborhood, which also includes China. And there's a elaborate chapter in the book on titled "Dealing with China," and as a activist of politics, or rather a student of politics, there was one particular paragraph in that chapter, or rather a coinage of a word that you have used, which caught my interest, and I would want to read that. You refer to certain sections of Indians as Chindians. As Chindians.
It's not my phrase, okay? There's an inventor of the word Chindia.
Yeah.
As a hint, I will tell you he's in some other political party, but I'll stop there.
And he also hails from Karnataka.
Huh?
Dr. Jaishankar vividly describes the characteristics of these Chindians, and this is what he says. It is the actions more than the articulation of these Chindians that are of deeper concern. By consciously underrating the China challenge, any sense of preparation in India was undermined till the change of 2014. The neglect of the border infrastructure was paralleled by an unwillingness to accelerate industrialization and create deep strengths. Even now, Make in India endeavors are attacked by them while ostensibly expressing concern at the trade imbalance with China. The combination of politics, policies and populism lowered our national guard and still continues to target our national morale. Not surprisingly, this is about as far as we can be from the traditions of realism. So there's a sense of, my understanding is that the shift that has taken place post-2014 in the way we are dealing with China is that we are dealing with China with a perspective of a more realistic perspective than any romantic ideas or idealistic ideas about how it should be.
Two comments. One, look, in politics, it's natural that everybody will try to outdo their competitors in terms of the strength of what they say. Okay? So I think people should always test words against record, against actions. So, you can stand out there and say, I'm the strongest, bravest, toughest guy out there. I would ask the question, okay, great. So let's see what happened, what actually was the impact on the ground. To me, in my book, I've used two examples. One, who actually prepared on the border. Okay. Now, on the border, there was a school of thought, a very dominant school of thought till 2014, saying if you leave your borders facing China, unprepared and undeveloped, that's the best defense you can have. Okay.
So,
now,
in fact, the earlier Defense Minister A.K. Antony articulated this on the floor of the Parliament.
Now, when you actually get into crunch time, what happens? You got to send your troops up there. Now, if you have decided that you're not going to develop the border, or even if you're going to develop it, very frankly, your heart is not in it. You're not giving it the priority. You're not deploying the best technology. You're not pushing people to do that. So, if you ask me, finally look, the current government will say we are stronger, the previous government will say no, we are stronger. That's a debate that will happen in politics. But look at the cold facts. Today, the border development budget per year has gone up roughly from about 3,500 crores a year to almost 15,000 crores, okay, per year. If you look at the road building, the speed of road building, the tunneling, the bridging, we are actually looking at 2x, 3x, 4x improvements. So if today we have been able to send and maintain troops out there, which we have done in those large numbers since 2020, it was only possible because actually on the ground you made a difference. Now that's on the border. I would say look at something much more basic. All of us today are troubled by the fact that there's a big trade deficit with China. Why are we being flooded with these Chinese goods? Okay. The best way of not being flooded with Chinese goods is produce Indian goods. Okay. So to produce Indian goods, what should you do? You should first push for Make in India. Now if the stand is, Make in India is not possible, it's a jumla, whatever you call it. If you say, look, let's all make it easier to do business, but if our policy is making it harder to do business, and environmental clearances were actually practiced as a tool to actually slow down industrialization in this country. If we run down our own industry, if we actually make it a point to, there were people who said we are not competent to do manufacturing. Now you can't enter a technology world after having abdicated the manufacturing world. An engineer who's never put his hands on a machine is not going to thereafter be able to talk about innovations and inventions. So I would say, where this whole China debate is concerned, there is a realist school, there is a much more romantic, fatalist, sometimes I would say even complicit school. I think there's been this constant debate, and it's not a new debate. This debate I've actually brought out in my book goes back to the time of independence. That in 1950, there was a very famous exchange of notes between Sardar Patel and Jawaharlal Nehru. And Patel actually warns of, he's expressing concern about what could be the intentions of China. And Nehru actually says, look, I can't imagine that the Chinese would ever do anything across the Himalayas. It is unimaginable, and we should not be driven by such fears. Now, you know what happened in 1962. So, at the end of the day, I would say it's very important, especially if you have the responsibility for the security of your country, to be very hard-headed about it, to be very practical. Don't let ideology confuse you and create situations where actually the price is eventually paid by the country.
You make a very interesting, I have actually made a reference of that line. You say, this is such an interesting quote from your book. The compass of national interest will guide us unerringly if we do not get distracted by ideological reservations or hidden agendas. And I think in the penultimate chapter where you answer the interesting what-ifs of history, where you try to understand what were the political discourse at the time of India making these important decisions, say vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis US, vis-a-vis Pakistan. You draw a lot from the correspondences that Sardar Patel had with Nehru, his positions on not just China but are dealing with both Israel and the United States. You also make reference to what was Ambedkar's position with respect to our foreign policy as a whole, and how anxious and worried he was about the direction of the foreign policy that the country took in the very initial years. You also speak about Shyama Prasad Mukherjee and his position on India, China, and India and Pakistan. And there was one particular incident that you referred to, which I was also not aware of, which took place right after we referred erringly the matter of accession to the United Nations. And you also mentioned how Canada and Belgium and a couple of other countries, Western countries at that time, UK primarily, tried to undermine the India position, and there was a sleight of hand. I would want you to explain, because like me, the audience is a young generation audience and we are not very conversant of these details. This was something new for me as well. So if you could explain, the difference in the perspective of, say, Sardar Patel, Ambedkar and Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, and what exactly happened, the Jammu Kashmir thing, the UN reference, and the role of UK, Canada, and Belgium at that time.
Sure. Look, you know, what happens in history is that countries, governments make choices. We grow up thinking that those were the natural choices. They were the only choices because those choices were made. Over a passage of time, they become like principles of our policy, of our behavior. So somewhere we don't even question. And you know, I'm of course referring to a past, and I think this should apply in the future as well. I mean, I would say 30, 40 years from now, people should have the right also to question what other choices we are making today. I think that is very much the legitimate way of how a country or a society develops. So what happened in the 1950s, which today people have forgotten, is there were actually debates about what should be our Pakistan policy, what should be our China policy. The sense was that the government at that time was too trusting of Pakistan, that it did deals with Pakistan which others felt Pakistan would not abide by, including treatment of minorities, especially treatment of minorities. There was a debate on China, that, you know, is China a country whose intentions towards India are benevolent or not? Now, and then there was a debate about America, that, you know, we had frictions with America, but there were questions asked saying, are we doing things which also unnecessarily irritate America, for example, by upholding China's case in many situations? Now, these today I have presented as the roads not taken, because these were choices. You know, Sardar Patel, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, these were members of the cabinet. You had a leader like Minu Masani of the Swatantra Party. I will refer to him as well. So what happened was, at that time, certain decisions were made. They presented choices. Those were not the choices which were made. But today, when we look at Pakistan, when we look at China, when we look at America, exactly those questions remain. Not maybe literally speaking, but questions about, you know, how do you make judgments? If you are trusting, you know, because you are ideologically inclined, you are hostile also because you have prejudices. You know, so to me, we need to be very hard-headed, very practical, very clear. What are India's interests? If India's interests require us to stand up, we stand up. If India's interests require that, you know, we are a little bit more considerate, or we manage it more tactfully, we should do it. But I would not I would not take a call which is based on whether I'm on the side of that country and that bloc and this ideology. I would take a call at the end of the day, does it suit my country or does it not? The second issue, the UN issue, today it is very clear. In fact, not now. I mean, it was very clear by the 1970s that taking the Kashmir issue to the UN Security Council was a fundamental error because you are taking it to a court where the judges are all stacked against you. That these were Western countries who had a bias towards Pakistan. And actually, if we had been hard-headed, if we had a good sense of international politics at that stage, we would not have taken that call. It was done, as actually a misreading of what the world was about. That somewhere we saw, UN, there's a sanctity about UN, these chaps will be impartial and, neutral arbiters. In fact, we were, taken for a ride by a set of countries who had their geopolitical agenda, who used Kashmir as an issue of vulnerability for us, and they continued to use it till it took us decades to finally take the call on Article 370. I mean, to me, Article 370 was not just a call within the country which we had to take, it actually has profound foreign policy implications. We have closed today a window of vulnerability which we were foolish enough to open in 1948.
So while you make references to the past and discuss the roads that we could have taken but we did not take, you also make very insightful observations about the present and the future. And one of that is regarding the narrative battles that we need to fight in today's digital media age, and also the challenge that comes in a theater, in a conflict zone or a war theater, where multinational companies with budgets which are even higher than GDPs of certain countries also come into play. So these two threats that you have amongst the many that you have highlighted are something that I think we should spend some time discussing about. So where do you see in the coming years, in a more digitized, more globalized space, the influence of these MNCs, these tech giants? How are they going to play a role in everyday lives of people, especially in times of conflict? And two, the narrative battles. We see the New York Times commenting about India. You see some other agency coming out with a survey and giving India a much lower ranking in the democracy index than Pakistan. And that's a narrative war that we need to battle.
In fact, on the press freedom, I think they gave us a lower ranking than Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So, but look, I think, the narrative, the battle of narratives is something we should expect, because in different ways we are defying the entrenched narrative. It's happening in different domains. It happens in politics. It happens even in business. After all, ratings, when you rate a country, you are determining the cost of interest for that. So you are actually affecting them by your judgment. And when you actually drill down, as our friend often does, you will find out that the basis for how judgments are made are often very, very subjective. So what we have seen, and this is something it's been steadily building up for the last 10 years. I expect it to reach a crescendo in the first 6 months of this year. You don't need to guess why. And as elections come closer, we will get, if it looks like it's going a way in which the narrative drivers don't like, they will actually start to attack the process. Now, we've seen that before. They will attack Supreme Court, they'll attack Election Commission, they will
EVMs.
Even the common sense of voters, So look, that's the way the game is played. Now, we have to, we are sort of big boys and girls now. I mean, we've got to figure this out and we have to fight back. So I don't think we need to keep taking it, as though there's someone superior out there on whose judgment we all live. I think we need to call them out. And that is part of this whole, the narrative contest. On the technology issue, I think it's far more complex because you have, from the, I would say, the market-based economies. Today you have these big giants, behemoths, who have the kind of clout and influence which are bigger than many countries too. And it's something which we have to factor in because international relations as a subject, some of you would be studying it, you tend to think of the state as the unit, as the player. Whereas now you have players bigger than states who are not states. But at the same time, you have the other side, which is in the non-market economies, when you have enterprises who are deeply back-ended to the state. You have to ask yourself, say, I refer to the digital domain, would you trust your data with players who are back-ended out there and some parts of that back-end? So I think today there are serious debates about trust and transparency. Where would you like to see your data go? And I think that's key to our digital partnerships.
So before I open the floor to audience questions, there's one interesting line that you write in the book, which of course caught my excitement. The whole country, of course, is waiting for the 22nd of January for the inauguration of the Bhavya Ram Mandir in Ayodhya. And so, in the book, you write that this excitement is not something that just the Bharatiyas are sharing, but this is also a matter of excitement deep in South Korea, in Southeast Asia. So if you could expound on how the construction of the Ram Mandir is being seen from outside of India.
I think it's important, especially for young people who travel and those of you who travel abroad, to go to those places where our cultural imprint historically has been very, very strong. Then you will realize that what is happening in India is not something which is, the interest, the following is not limited to us. That other societies are following a lot of this because many of them, you go to, in fact, as once you start moving eastwards from our bound, you can see actually a very, very strong cultural influence. And in fact, the reference I make, if I remember right, is actually to Korea, because in Korea there is a kind of a belief that one of their, that they actually have a connection between their royalty and Ayodhya. So in fact, even in the last few years, as we have seen the revival of Ayodhya, we have actually had Korean participation in cultural programs and presence out there. They take it as a matter of pride. So I would say on 22nd of January that, a lot of people across the world will be looking at what's happening.
Absolutely. So let's have some questions from the audience.
So there are a couple of questions that the students of PES University have for you that we really hope you'd be gracious enough to answer. It is not every day we get to pick the brains of the top diplomat of the country. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, sir. Starting off, sir, the world is currently marred by a lot of conflicts, geopolitical conflicts, wars, and during these times, there is an increasing diplomatic pressure on India to pick sides from different countries in the world. But the Indian foreign policy, like you said, always puts India's interests first and always uses this platform to spread peace instead of picking sides. So what are the consequences of India not playing by the rules and not bowing down to international pressure, but putting forth its own point around the world?
there are times when it's not easy, when people put pressure on you and sometimes put pressure on you publicly. But when you stand your ground and you stand your ground repeatedly, two things happen. Those who put pressure on you start to get a bit tired. They sometimes back off, or at least they don't do it with the same vehemence. But a lot of other countries come at you and say, we wanted to say that too. And you actually said or took a stand, which many of us wanted to do. So, people, there are expectations from the world, from other countries about India. When we take a stand, the world listens. And I think that's why it's important we do.
Yeah. Can we have the next question?
Yeah. So my question to you is about illegal immigration. Do you believe it is an internal threat, or do you believe it is a global impediment? And what do you think are the measures one nation can take to, decrease the amount of illegal immigration that happens?
I think anything illegal by definition is a threat.
Absolutely.
And I see no reason why illegal immigration should be given a free pass. Because, look, we work so hard to build our country, our society. Think of it as your house. Would you let a stranger occupy your house simply because you left your front door open? Or your back door open? So, somewhere I think we need to understand, because again, sometimes these are politically driven narratives, that freedoms mean that, that there's lack of governance. That's a sign of freedom. That somehow we are good to the neighborhood because we are not securing our borders. To me, there are basics of what a nation state is about and what good governance is about. And certainly, if I have worked, as hard as we all have done, I would be interested in securing what I have done and making sure that the entitled people get the benefits within the society, not those who have come here seeking benefits, from other people's work.
Thank you. Can we have the mic go around
Yes,
in the
absolutely.
audience?
The floor is now open for questions. The mic will be coming around and you may ask your questions. Thank you.
We will come, sir, but I have, I am biased towards students here, so I would want to take questions from the students first. So, the gentleman in the black there.
So Namaste sir, my name is Sumukha. I am a MCA student. So my question is to both of you. I don't know, this won't be controversial. Will reservation end this country, or country will end the reservation? Second question sir. So we are dependent on United States. So during the India 1971 war, that same United States was against us, and it camouflaged, and it is with us right now. It is not guaranteed that it will be in the same friendship. So how would you deal that? Similarly, like with our friends, happens friends with benefit, some, how do you deal with this? Whom do you trust? Like, lot of backstabbing happens. So
Sure. I'll let Tejasvi answer the first question. I'll do the second.
The first rule of politics and the first rule of diplomacy, I dare say in front of him, is never to speak when your boss is around. So always let the senior take the question.
Okay. I think he answered your first question. So on the second question, look, interests change, countries change, It's not that any country has the same, permanent attitude towards another country, because we all evolve. I mean, if you look at India and the United States, absolutely, I accept that, the United States had policies right from the 1950s and 60s and 70s which were hurtful to our interests. And what they did during Bangladesh was particularly for us unacceptable. But what has happened is, thereafter, other equations have happened in the world. So, my business runs to a large degree on with whom do your interests converge at a particular point of time. I mean, I would give you the flip side of it. The same United States, after all, was also in the 1960s a provider of wheat, especially to a country when we were going through famine. It has been a partner in many of our big infrastructure, in many of our educational institutions, including setting up the IITs. It is today, we are in Bengaluru, it is today a major tech partner and an economic partner. So if I were today to make a judgment, because that is really what you're asking me, am I going to make my judgment, say, on what I see are my possible gains by working with the US for the next 20, 30, 50 years? Or would I go with what is a real bad memory of what it was 50, 60 years ago? So I think in a way it's like how human beings relate to each other. Nobody has, it's a very exceptional relationship between people or between countries where everything is great forever. But there are ups and downs. If you look, in fact, you look at US and China, look at the ups and downs. You look at US and Russia, Soviet Union. The US was enormously helpful to the Soviet Union during the Second World War. But within a few years, Cold War started. So this is not, this is not these are not sort of BFF that you make a decision and then say, okay, I'm sticking with that forever.
So that was Dr. Jaishankar answering in the proper millennial lingo. Thank you. Can we have the next question from this side, lest we be accused of not giving space to the left?
I think I need to report this, that you are giving space to the left.
Yes.
Here it's okay, not there.
But still, that means that we are in a position to give them space.
Okay.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Namaste, sir. It is absolutely a privilege to talk to you, sir. I'm Vaishnavi from MBA department. My question to you is, with the rise of regional and ideological movements, how do you see the party system evolving in the next few years? Also, what advice would you give to the young people who are interested in joining politics?
You want to be like him?
Both of you, sir. No worries.
Please.
Now, my advice to young people who want to join politics is, you have a model.
Thank you.
But, our country has seen, I'm, by the way, a student of political science. So I've actually studied politics as a academic pursuit. We have had, national parties, we've had regional parties, we've had identity-based parties. It's reflective of our diversity. My own preference, and obviously that of a very significant part of our country, is a society as pluralistic and diverse as ours needs a national party, because it's only a national party which can actually integrate the totality of views, interests, thoughts, and somewhere distill from that what is a national purpose. That if we end up really as a country with, let us say, many regional parties, and we've had periods, some of you would remember, for example, the 1990s, and we have seen, it's a broadly recognized principle in political science that coalition politics is actually, coalition governments are actually may not be dysfunctional, but certainly are not efficient, are not purposeful, are not impactful. So to me, actually, the fact that in 2014, after 1989, we had a government which had a majority in parliament was actually an enormous change and a very, very welcome change. Because that has actually been the driver of all that we have seen for the last 10 years.
Thank you, sir. We'll have one last question. So, because I'm afraid we are running out of time, so we will have the question from here, if you could please. Is there somebody with a mic there in the first row?
There isn't.
Okay. Okay, so let's take this question.
Hi, sir. Thank you for coming to our university today. One question I have for you, it's rather a naive question, but I'm hoping to be bold like the tone has been set. What do you think from a global perspective is the first step a university like PES can take in shaping the students and faculty not only to empower themselves in a more holistic versions of they can be, but also to shape them as contributors to a new narrative of Bharat in the global context? So if you were to give, in a nutshell, an advice from a foreign policy perspective or placing Bharat in the global position, what is the role of a university in cultivating individuals and Bharatiyans?
My day began in a university in Kathmandu. My day is ending in a university. And every time I come to a university, or please do sit down, I often reflect on my own. And I mean, clearly university is a enormously shaping experience. Years later, you would look back on this period and whatever you are, a large part of it would be influenced by what you are going through at this point of time. In terms of how do you prepare, I think you are actually all already preparing, sometimes without even knowing it, that you are all far more connected with the world, that your ambition, your confidence levels, your expectations are very much stronger. In fact, again, because I go back to Sanjeev, what he said about the earlier generations had a much more limited sense of what we could do and the risk taking, the connection to the world, the understanding of the world. That was far more limited than what all of you have. So actually, if I had not advised, but if I had a wish, I would like to be you, And today, because to me, these 25 years ahead of us are going to be the years that will define actually Bharat. That in 2047, we will be really, I think, shapers of what is happening in the world. And it's actually your generation which will have both the responsibility and the opportunity to do that. So I really wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, sir. We could not have ended this wonderful, scintillating conversation on a more positive, a more higher note. At a time in history when India is climbing new heights with more confidence, with never before seen audaciousness, the world has taken note of the fact that Bharat matters, that India truly matters. And it is in this context that Dr. S. Jaishankar's book is, I'm saying this after I have read this, and this is not like a Instagrammer saying, please subscribe, like my video. This is a really good book and eminently readable. So I urge all of you, especially the young, to please read this book. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of geopolitics, there's a lot of economic lessons that one can draw and understand. And I would want to conclude by the very last line in the book, sir, which has stayed with me. The title of the book is Why Bharat Matters. One would naturally expect that the very first chapter of the book would deal with that very question, but Dr. Jaishankar has kept that chapter and that question to the very last. And in the very last sentence of the last chapter of the book, he sums up his answer. Why Bharat matters. With each passing day, it is becoming clearer that India matters because it is Bharat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for gracing this occasion. I would now request our Honorable Pro-Chancellor, Professor Jawahar Doreswamy, and our Honorable Chief Operating Officer. Sure. May I request the Honorable External Affairs Minister to please officially unveil his latest literary work, Why Bharat Matters, on PES University this evening.